Good morning, everybody. I just want to recognize the brilliance of the last four people who came up here. How's everyone doing? Because my head is spinning with ideas. So hopefully you can take a deep breath and we can get into this. So I first want to start by saying I just very much appreciate the opportunity to be on these tribal lands and to share with these ideas with you today. I'm going to cover a fair bit of ground in a very short amount of time. So I encourage you to follow up on my paper and the conference proceedings, and also to continue the conversation at lunch and later in the conference. I think we talk a lot about quality, right? How we do mathematics education. I think what we don't talk as much about is quantity, right? How much mathematics education there should be, right? And we don't often ask this question, right? Should there be less mathematics education? That's the question that I want to engage today. Now, to be clear, I believe that we do need mathematics education, right? We see the joy that doing mathematics can bring people. We know that mathematics is required for college access and high-paying STEM jobs. We're grateful, right, for the medicines and technologies that save the lives of our families and friends. And we also acknowledge the role that mathematics plays, oftentimes through STEM, in the context of international competitiveness. But to answer the quantity question, I think we need to interrogate the visions that we hold for society, right? Who those visions exclude and who they include. And whether mathematics education can actually help us fully realize those visions. Now to date, I've been doing mathematics education because I thought it would contribute to a vision of the world with justice for minoritized groups. Now living in the United States, this means repairing the ongoing effects of the genocide and plunder wreaked by slavery and settler colonialism. But I've become impatient, and I'm skeptical of mathematics education as a viable pathway. I also now see the ways that mathematics education can actually work against this vision. The fact is that everything has costs, including math education. And I want to spend a few minutes talking about some of those costs. Now, you don't need to be able to read this, it's just a picture of a transcript. During P16, there are costs. Right? The curriculum is zero-sum. More time for one subject means less time for other subjects. Now, since NCLB in 2001, we've seen cuts to science, art, and physical education in U.S. schools, and Dr. Tate talked a little bit about this yesterday, and he pulled it even further back historically, right? The rise of math and STEM education. Now, math education is not solely to blame for this, but its ascendancy has imposed an opportunity cost on the rest of the curriculum. Now, after college, right, after people with math and STEM degrees enter the workforce, there are other kinds of costs. We know that some STEM graduates end up on Wall Street as quants, building the mathematical models and trading algorithms that fuel predatory capitalism, and that enabled the mortgage crisis and the Great Recession of 2008. We also know that STEM graduates gravitate towards Silicon Valley, where they might develop technologies that lead to massive job loss, or work for social media companies with the potential to destabilize democracies. Now, as someone who worked in both the business world and in the tech world before I became an educator, I've got a unique perspective on these kinds of scenarios. Now, one might argue that the majority of STEM graduates don't pursue such pathways. But the problem is that modern technologies wreak harm that is easily scalable. So the fact is, it just doesn't take that many STEM professionals to cause system-wide damage. I think we've also got to look to the future. Right? One day, mathematics and STEM education are going to take us beyond the moon to the outer reaches of the galaxy. But what I worry about is what we're going to bring with us. So this is a digital rendering by a Romanian artist, Andrei Lacatusu. And it came from a project called Life on Mars, where this artist was trying to envision some of the effects of space colonization that we normally don't talk about. And what I worry is, could we end up with a McDonald's on Mars and racism on Jupiter? Now, math educators may not want that future, right? But capitalism doesn't care what we want, right?
Social studies or music education won't be the things that take us to other planets. This is going to be an ethical quagmire created by mathematics and STEM education. Now you might be thinking, what about equity and justice, right? Can't more mathematics education lead to equity and justice? Now for decades, math educators have argued that access to mathematics is a matter of equity for minoritized groups. Now that argument has some moral elements, but it's also grounded in basic economics, right? So if STEM jobs are among the most lucrative, and they are, then pursuing STEM is a logical response to wage stagnation and rampant income inequality. Now with respect to race then, more racial equity in mathematics classrooms has been conceptualized, right, as a pathway to more racial justice in society writ large. And that view is actually what compelled me to become an educator in the first place. But now I'm starting to see certain problems with that logic. So while we work hard to make mathematics accessible to racially minoritized students, the problem is this, right? So as Erica Bullock, Danny Martin, and others have shown, white dominant systems have a way of reconfiguring themselves to re-secure advantage, right? So Algebra for All has been a decades-long equity struggle, but where does it all end when you've got parents lobbying to have 8th graders take calculus? From that perspective, the quantity of mathematics education may not matter so much for people from minoritized groups. Another problem here is that while greater black and brown participation in the STEM workforce may attenuate racial wealth gaps, it does not account for how STEM has been deployed to dehumanize people of color. And this is something I think Dr. Morris was getting at a bit yesterday. So on the one hand, you have non-Asian students of color, because they don't have a chance to show their mathematical brilliance, their intellectual capacity is positioned as deficient. And then on the other hand, you have Asian students, this is something I've written about, who are positioned as being too intelligent, right? They're positioned as kind of these androids, and they get dehumanized that way. So what I say is that a more racially just world can't only be about economics, right? It must also be one where people of color are recognized as full human beings. Finally, there's the matter of representation, right? Perhaps we believe that more mathematics education for minoritized people will lead to greater representation in the elite sectors of society. But is our goal simply more women engineers at Facebook and a native person running Goldman Sachs? Right? I think we have to reckon with the limits of equity in terms of representation. My point is that we need to be humble about the prospects of mathematics education to affect justice at the societal level. School-level equity work in math education is needed, right? But I now see it as a more incremental project of harm reduction rather than one of radical transformation. Right, so some of you know the tool that I developed with Dan Reinholz to help teachers address issues of implicit bias. Now, if that leads to more girls of color, more emerging multilingual students, having opportunities to participate in math classrooms, that matters, right? That's a good thing, and I remain committed to that kind of work. But it also still ends up giving these students access to mathematics and to the world as they are, right? The endpoints of their educational journeys have not fundamentally changed. I think it's much easier to focus on what we might lose by having less mathematics education, but I actually believe that there's a lot to gain, right? So one question we could ask is, with less math education, what could we do with that newly open space in the curriculum? Now imagine if every student was required to learn about voter suppression tactics. Or if every student was required to take a course in the politics of indigenous sovereignty, or on climate policy, or on healthcare reform. My goal here isn't to propose and debate solutions. In fact, this is what I hope to provoke in conversation dialogue with all of you. But I'll say that I've been in math education for almost 20 years, right? As a math teacher, as a math teacher educator, and as a math education researcher. So I don't come to these ideas lightly. My hope is that we begin to seriously consider strategic divestments of mathematics education and think about what the value of those divestments might be to society writ large. It's simply not enough for each of us to focus on our individual silos of research or practice and be content with incremental change. What I argue is that the field of mathematics education should prioritize a goal of justice for minoritized groups and do so with urgency, even if that means less mathematics education. Thank you.